Hi, everybody. This is Noelle from Petitti Garden Centers, and we're actually going to do a spotlight on redbud trees. And right next to me, I have a beautiful redbud. This one is actually called Flamethrower. So what we're going to talk about today is how to be successful with growing redbuds. Well, what you need to know, first of all, is their sun conditions, what they prefer. And basically, they do like full sun conditions or all the way to a part shade condition, okay? The thing about it is that redbuds are actually a Ohio native plant, okay, or tree, and you find them on the edges of wooded areas, kind of as an understory tree. So, but when you have a very colorful variety like this one, Flamethrower, you actually do want to expose them to a little bit more sun so you get the benefit of all those colors in their foliage. So remember, light conditions, full sun, so 6 or more hours of sunlight, to part shade, so in that 4 to 6 hours of sunlight there. Okay, now, next thing that we need to know is soil. Now, redbuds, they are interesting in the fact that they're part of the pea family. So when their roots get established, they develop very, very long tap roots that will go very far into the ground, okay? So the soil, in order for them to grow really well and be successful, is you want it about average to slightly moist. You do want it to be well drained. They can tolerate clay soil to a point, but if they can't keep moving down into the soil, they're gonna have a problem, okay? So you do wanna amend that soil. Put as many organic amendments that you can in the soil. We always talk about, compost and sweet peat and planting mixes. Do try to mix your soil, make sure you amend it. About 50% your regular soil, your natural soil, and 50% your amendments. And then go ahead and work that in, okay? If you keep that soil just consistently moist, maybe just let it go slightly dry, you'll be fine. Redbuds are not necessarily known for their drought tolerance, so just keep that in mind. And also be aware that they're not necessarily known for their heat tolerance either, so that's where that consistent moisture comes into play. Now, we should talk about watering since we're talking about consistent soil moisture. Again, with watering, it's typically what we recommend is 1 inch of water applied 1 time per week. A slow, deep watering is always going to be really, really healthy for your trees, your shrubs, your perennials, and so forth, okay? Now, with this, again, you don't want them to be overly wet. They do not like wet standing water conditions, okay? So it goes back to the soil, well-drained soil, consistent moisture, you'll be successful. If it rains for you and you get 1 inch of water that week, you don't have to worry about watering. If it doesn't and we're in a drier condition, I would definitely recommend putting the hose on a trickle or a soaker hose at the base of the tree and running the trickle, the garden hose on a trickle for maybe an hour or two. Soaker hose, again, probably 30 minutes to an hour. You'll be ready to go for that week. Okay, now, fertilizer. They don't need a lot of fertilizer because hopefully you've amended that soil so they've got a lot of natural organic nutrients to them. But when you're feeding trees, it does help keep that tree healthy, right? A little bit stronger so they can battle with the weather and the elements and so forth. So when you're feeding your deciduous trees, you're typically applying plant tone or tree tone, okay? And I want you to complement that with iron tone to keep things green. And then you're going to apply that twice a season, once in the spring and once midsummer, and that's it, okay? So that's your sun, soil, water, and fertilizer. Now let's talk a little bit about redbud trees because they do have a little bit of maintenance here. And with redbuds, they can have, when they first start out, sort of very, very flexible branches. When they get a little bit older, they're going to get a little bit hardy, a little bit woodier, if you will. And so sometimes you get some branches that will break and sometimes cross in between, maybe even become a little bit thinner, you're going to want to remove those. So we always talk about removing the 3 Ds, the dead, the diseased, and the dry or damaged, okay? So you want to make sure that when you're looking at your redbud, if you see any of the 3 Ds, you want to get in there, sterile, sharp pair of pruners, go ahead and take care of it. Or maybe if it's a larger branch, you'll need a lopper or something that's a little bit larger that can take care of that, okay? Other than that, they're fairly low maintenance plants. Again, being Ohio natives, they're very, very adaptable as long as you're providing them with all the conditions that they do prefer. Now, as far as attributes are concerned, redbuds are phenomenal. Not only are they an Ohio native plant, they are also one of the most beautiful spring blooming trees out there. And when we really need some color in early spring, typically they bloom March and April for us in Northeast Ohio. It is this vibrant, typically vibrant, almost fluorescent violet color, okay? And so you can see them for a very long distance, and sometimes you'll see natural stands of the eastern redbud just out in the distance in fields and things, and it's amazing. It's absolutely gorgeous. So not only a great spring bloomer, those spring blooms do provide nectar for any early pollinator as well. They also, the flowers, provide seeds, and of course, as they develop seeds, that is more food for your songbirds, okay? So you'll see butterflies, you will see bees, you will see songbirds, you will see lots of different pollinators around this tree. It's a good active tree for supporting your wildlife, your beneficial wildlife. Okay. What else? You can actually cut the branches of your redwood tree, and they do work as a nice cut flower. Or if you like to get some color early on and you want to force some of your branches, that's great. Just like how we talk about forsythia, cutting those branches when they're budded up very early in the spring or late winter. You cut those branches and bring them inside your home, put them in water, and there you go. You get your forsythia flowers. You can do that same thing with redbud. So there's some really, really good things about this tree, and they look great in the landscape. So most of the time we'll use them as specimens like Flamethrower. You really just need one. It'll really stand out in the landscape. Place it at the corner of a garden bed, and wow, you've really got a lot of foliage color. I should have mentioned with redbuds, their foliage is very, very pleasing. And typically when you look at this tree, it has a beautiful heart-shaped leaf or cordate leaf. And they all have that. And it really is a beautiful shape in nature. Many of newer varieties of redbuds have different colorful leaves, so we'll show you those today. But they really do all look great, and they all are spring bloomers. So it's a great plant to have. Now, there's 3 types of redbud forms, I should say. They're all Cersis canedensis. They may be different varieties and different crosses of varieties to come to this actual name species. But when you look at your redbuds, you will have typically a very rounded, and I should say the upright varieties. So the upright varieties typically have a very rounded, wide canopy to them. Some of them actually are a little bit shorter in height than they are in width. So you kind of get this sort of flat top canopy and very, very rounded edges, okay? And those upright varieties are going to grow typically around your 20 to 30 foot mark. So they're not a large tree by any means. They're actually a smaller sized deciduous tree. But that's usually the max that we're looking at. 20 to 30 foot tall and about 20 to 30 foot wide as your typical rounded redbud, okay? There are also a few trees that are a little bit smaller, and these are going to be like your cultivated varieties like Flamethrower here, where you still have that rounded canopy. However, they're a little bit more compact. So now Flamethrower, Rising Sun, Merlot, They're actually between the 10 to 20 foot mark, tall and wide. Okay, so there's a few varieties that do have that more compact habit. The third type of redbud, as we know and we see a lot in landscapes, is the weeping variety. And we'll show you some weeping varieties here today. Typically, your weeping redbuds grow anywhere between 5 foot to about 10 foot tall, okay? It's a rarity that they get up to 10 foot, but if you keep staking them and keep on training them, they could grow up to 10 feet. The width is usually a little bit more narrow, but we're gonna just say 5 to 10, okay? With some of the redbuds, they will stay in between 4 to 6 foot widths, okay? So it just kind of depends on their weeping habit and how their branches fall and arch and cascade over, right? So Flamethrower, obviously gorgeous coloration. One of the reasons this plant looks so multicolored is because the leaves do develop at different points in the growing season. And so you get that array of burgundy, and sometimes you'll see like an orangey, peachy tone to it, a golden tone, and then chartreuse colors. So Flamethrower is actually crossed between two varieties, one upright and actually one weeping type. So the upright is called Rising Sun, which we actually do have and we'll show you. And it is actually crossed with Ruby Fall. So it is a cascading variety with dark foliage. This plant will do very, very nicely again in those sunnier conditions, keeping that coloration of its foliage, okay? So Flamethrower, medium size, beautiful coloration, and obviously absolutely gorgeous leaves. Now we're standing by our true native. This is your Eastern Redbud, or Cersis canedensis. So this is your straight species tree here, redbud tree. You can see beautiful green foliage, heart-shaped foliage, kind of a little bit thinner, and some of the newer varieties I'm going to show you, they'll be a little bit thicker, a little bit glossier. So again, with the straight species, they might not have as much heat or drought tolerance that I was talking about before built in. But you'll notice that this tree has produced a lot of seed pods, and that's what the Cersis canedensis is named for, the actual seed pods there. And the seed pods, you can tell, are definitely in the pea family. There's a true pod with all the little seed development. If you've never grown an Eastern Redbud before, had them in the yard, they will drop the seeds. The birds will pick up the seeds and drop the seeds for you. And you might find some Eastern Redbud seedlings around, which is a great gift. But again, this is the true green variety. Beautiful violet purple flowers in the spring. Again, larger canopy and habit, that 20 to 30 foot mark, tall and wide, and really, really gorgeous. This one is actually called Luscious Lavender. So you can tell green leaf redbud. And I should have mentioned the green leaf color, fall color, is usually a nice golden yellow. So they do have a nice fall color. The green leaves, again, very heart-shaped, very typical of the redbud family. But what you see here is they are way more glossy and very, very thick. Another big benefit with Luscious Lavender is it has got the largest of the flowers of all the redbuds so far, okay? So Luscious Lavender, really, really big violet redbud flowers. And then, of course, this nice glossy, thicker foliage. When you see a redbud that has that thicker foliage, that more glossiness to the leaves, that usually indicates that they are a little bit better with heat tolerance and drought tolerance, okay? So look for those attributes if you are planning to put this plant in a very hot, sunny area. Look for the glossiness. Okay, now we're by another green leaf variety, but this one's a little bit different. This one's called Cotton Candy. Cotton Candy has that typical heart-shaped leaf, a little bit less heart-shaped, a little bit more oval, but that's okay. What's neat about this one is the bloom color in spring is a pastel pink. It is a softer color, very, very pretty. So if you're trying to match a landscape, trying to do not the violets, try this one, Cotton Candy with the soft pastel pink. The other interesting fact with this one is it has a more narrow canopy. So instead of having those wide round canopies, it's actually about half the width. So still that 20 to 30 foot mark in height, but only about 10 to 15 foot wide. So this one could be put in a more narrow space if you're looking for the redbud species, but you want a little bit more compact habitat. This one now, as Taylor's walking backwards, and hopefully she won't trip over any plants, this is called, I just lost it. Golden Hearts, sorry, right? Let me just double check, everybody. Hearts of Gold, sorry, lots of different names. Hearts of Gold, as you can tell, definitely upright redbud, has a little bit of pendulous branching and foliage, which is cool, and it has a lot to do with how big these leaves are. And you'll find some of these gold varieties do have these big leaves, very indicative of this variety. So Hearts of Gold, really nice. Again, that 20 to 30 foot tall and wide one. But again, lovely bright chartreuse color. It typically will get more yellow spring into summer, and then sometimes late summer, you'll find with redbuds that they may fade in color. Has a lot to do with the heat. Again, at that time of year, they may fade in color, and then that color will start to turn into some of the fall coloration, okay, which would be a yellowy color. So again, look for Hearts of Gold. We mentioned all of the green varieties for the most part for the larger redbud trees. And now we're moving into more of the burgundy leaf. So this is a very popular variety. It's called Forest Pansy. Obviously, you can see that lovely purple color. Again, with the heat of the summer, it fades a little bit, but typically will stay a nice purpley burgundy color for you. Forest Pansy, like I said, full size, 20 to 30 foot tall, very wide canopy, beautiful, beautiful specimen tree, kind of in the middle of a yard or just off to the side where you have enough room away from the home, away from maybe some pathways and other things. It really is a gorgeous, gorgeous plant and has been used in a lot of breeding to make other redbud varieties with that darker foliage. This one is Carolina Sweetheart. This is definitely a newer variety. You will see a lot of color changes on this plant like you would Flamethrower. Carolina Sweetheart is kind of, she's kind of in between the full taller varieties and the smaller tree varieties, where you've got a wider range of sizes on this one. And I think it's because Carolina Sweetheart is so new that they haven't really seen how big she'll get when she's at full maturity. So anywhere from 15 to 30 feet on this one. You can see the dark burgundy colors with this one. And then also look at this variegated leaf. So there are pinks and whites and greens all on the same plant, and obviously burgundies. And it is a really, really fun tree out in the landscape. Okay, now these are still upright trees, but we're in that smaller, more compact category, like Flamethrower that I showed you first off. This one is called the Rising Sun. Rising Sun is going to go through all those citrusy tones of colors. You start off the season with kind of a peachy, orangey, grapefruit color. And you can tell the new foliage, as it keeps producing, is going to have those colors. So you get that variation in color, just like you do with Flamethrower. Then it'll move into golds, and then, of course, your apple greens. And it's a really, really beautiful plant. Again, this one, we're talking anywhere from, let's say, 10 to 20 foot, but it does stay on the more compact side of being an upright, rounded tree. beautiful. This one is called Merlot. Now, Merlot is typically, like its namesake, a dark burgundy wine. So reddish burgundy color typically. But right here where we have it in the nursery, it is under shade. So therefore, you'll get a little bit of fading in color. So again, just envision where you're going to place this plant out in your landscape. More sun equals more foliage color. Darker or shady areas are going to have it fade just a little bit. And that's pretty indicative of most of these Redbud varieties. With Merlot, it is actually a cross between a Texas white Redbud and forest pansy, which we showed you earlier. But you get a little bit more compact habit. You also get the dark coloration, but you get a very nice, glossy, thicker foliage on this one. So again, as I mentioned before, the more thick and glossy the foliage is, typically the better heat and drought tolerance. I'm by two of our weeping redbuds right here. So as I mentioned, this is that third type of growth habit for our redbuds that you'll find commonly out in the nursery. This is Ruby Falls with the dark foliage. This is Golden Falls with that kind of greenish golden foliage. You'll see more of the gold at the tips with that newer foliage down there. Now, these two were actually started. There is a very popular type. It's called Lavender Twist. Taylor will show you pictures. Lavender Twist was actually the parent for both of these. So it's a beautiful weeping redbud, green foliage, pretty violet lavender flowers in the spring. And it has a very thick kind of umbrella-like arching stem or branching, if you will. It's really, really gorgeous. And when they started developing other varieties, they crossed that Lavender Twist with Hearts of Gold, which I showed you earlier. So that's how they got Golden Falls. And this one they crossed with, you can probably guess it, Forest Pansy. So sometimes it's a weeper with an upright, and here you go, you get weeping varieties. Now these guys, as I mentioned before, are on the smaller side of specimen deciduous trees, right? You still get the spring blooming, you get all the beautiful benefits of that lovely heart-shaped foliage, you get the coloration that you'd like as well. But they really only grow maximum. We typically don't see them any taller than that 10-foot height. And typically they need staking in order to get up there. So more often we see them kind of at this 5 to 6 foot height. This one obviously is a little bit taller, and you can tell the stake is much taller up here too. So that trunk's gonna continue to grow up that way as long as it's supported. And then the branches are going to slowly arch down and fill in. Width is usually about 4 to 5 foot. It really is not very wide with either one of these two varieties. But again, it makes a perfect plant for those smaller spaces in the garden where you need that beautiful cascading habit. You can stick it by walkways. You can stick it closer to the sides of a home because they're not huge trees. And it'll work out very, very well in the landscape for you. Okay, so everybody, just remember with your redbuds, Ohio native, awesome, very adaptable to soils, can tolerate clay, can actually tolerate some deer browsing too. And the deer don't seem to bother the redbuds very much, which is great. But remember to keep them happy, sun conditions, full sun to part shade. Make sure that your soil is well drained, but average moisture or consistently moist and amended, okay, so that taproot system can move down into the soil. Make sure that you are watering it consistently, 1 inch of water 1 time per week, slowly and deeply. And then, of course, feed them twice a year. You can use plant tone and or tree tone and add on iron tone to green them up. I don't really mean green. They'll stay their colors. And then you will have great success with your redbuds. Enjoy.